The first time my mom broke into my apartment, I tried to convince myself it was an accident. The second time, I called it concern. But by the third time, standing frozen in my own doorway while I watched her casually rearrange my living room like it belonged to her, I finally understood the truth. This wasn't love, it was control. My name is Lauren Whitmore, and that realization hit me harder than anything she'd ever said to my face. I had moved 3 hours away for a reason. New job, new building, new locks, or so I thought. I wanted a life that was quiet, earned, and mine. Instead, I came home to the sound of someone humming in my kitchen, using my mug, my coffee, my space. She smiled when she saw me, like she'd been waiting. No apology, no explanation, just comfort, her comfort. And something inside me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that felt permanent. I smiled back because I had learned young that reacting only gave her more power. But as I stood there listening to her talk about my neighbors and my grocery choices, I realized this wasn't going to stop on its own. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to argue. I wanted to understand how deep it went. Because if my own mother felt entitled to my life, then walking away quietly wasn't enough anymore. I needed clarity, and I needed proof. I just didn't know yet how much she'd already taken. She acted like nothing was wrong. That was always her greatest skill. My mom had a way of smoothing over invasions with warmth, like crossing boundaries was simply part of being close. She handed me a mug and said, "You look tired," as if she hadn't let herself into my locked apartment without asking. When I finally asked how she got in, she tilted her head and said, "You gave me a key, remember?" And I did, months ago, back when I thought trust worked both ways, back when I believed distance would make us healthier instead of giving her a new challenge. She spoke as if the conversation was already over, like the explanation itself erased the problem. I wanted to say something sharp, something final, but years of conditioning held me back. Instead, I nodded and let the moment pass. That night, after she left, I sat on my couch staring at the door. I replayed her movements in my head, the way she knew where everything was, the way she'd opened drawers that weren't necessary, the way she'd commented on personal things she shouldn't have known. That was when I realized this wasn't about checking on me, it was about monitoring me, about making sure my independence was temporary. The anger came slowly, creeping in under my skin, because anger meant acknowledging something painful. My mother didn't see me as separate from her, and if I tried to confront her directly, she'd deny it, cry, twist it, and somehow I'd be the one apologizing. I'd lived that cycle too many times. So instead of calling her, instead of demanding my key back, I did something different. I stayed quiet, and I started paying attention, because silence, I was learning, can be a trap or a weapon. Over the next few weeks, I noticed patterns I couldn't ignore anymore. Things in my apartment moved slightly when I came home from work. The thermostat changed, my mail stack rearranged. Small details, easy to dismiss if I wanted to stay comfortable in denial, but I didn't. Each change felt like a fingerprint I couldn't wash off. When I finally asked her not to stop by unannounced, she laughed. Not nervously, not awkwardly, just laughed, like I'd told a joke. "I'm your mother," she said. "I don't need an appointment." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended, because it explained everything. She didn't see boundaries as healthy, she saw them as disrespect, and that meant every request I made would be treated as a challenge. I thought about changing the locks immediately, but something stopped me. A quiet voice telling me that if I reacted too fast, I'd never know the full truth. So instead, I waited. I let her believe she was still welcome. I let her think I was still passive. And while she grew more comfortable, I began preparing. I installed cameras, discreet ones she wouldn't notice. I documented dates, times, behavior. I stopped sharing details about my life, just to see what she'd discover on her own. And that's when it became undeniable. She wasn't just stopping by, she was searching, reading, evaluating, deciding what version of me she'd report back to the family. That realization hurt more than the invasion itself, because it meant the person who was supposed to protect me was quietly undermining me instead. And the more I learned, the calmer I became. Calm isn't weakness, calm is focus, and I was starting to see exactly how this would end. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, it was resisting the urge to expose her immediately. I wanted validation. I wanted someone to say, "You're not crazy." But I knew better. People like my mother thrive in chaos. They survive confrontation and collapse under structure. So I gave her neither anger nor explanation. I let her keep coming. I watched her grow more comfortable, more careless. She stopped hiding it. She left notes. She rearranged things in ways that felt intentionally personal, like she wanted me to know she'd been there. Meanwhile, she started telling relatives that I was overwhelmed and not handling independence well. I heard it through cousins, through subtle questions disguised as concern. And that's when the situation crossed a line, because now she wasn't just invading my space, she was shaping a narrative, one where she was the worried parent and I was the unstable daughter. That narrative was dangerous. I knew what it could lead to: interventions, pressure, control disguised as help. So I stopped thinking emotionally and started thinking strategically. I consulted a lawyer quietly. I asked questions I'd never imagined asking about my own family: trespassing, harassment, documentation, what counted as proof, what didn't. I learned more in one afternoon than I had in years of trying to reason with her. And the most powerful thing I learned was this: intentions don't matter, behavior does, and I had more than enough evidence now. All that was left was timing, because the right truth, revealed at the wrong moment, can still be ignored. I waited for the moment she would overstep so clearly that she couldn't deny it. It didn't take long. One evening, I came home early without warning. I stood outside my own apartment door and listened to the sound of drawers opening inside. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. I unlocked the door and walked in quietly. She froze mid-motion, holding a folder she had no business touching. Our eyes met. For a second, the mask slipped. Not guilt, panic. Then it was gone, replaced by a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She started talking fast, explaining things I hadn't asked. I didn't interrupt. I just let her talk while the cameras recorded everything. That night, after she left, I sat on the floor and cried, not because I was broken, but because I was done pretending. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't confront her privately. I wouldn't fight her on emotion. I would show her reality, exactly as it was, with witnesses and consequences. The next day, I changed the locks, for real this time, and I didn't tell her. I wanted her to discover it herself, because surprises hit harder when someone thinks they're still in control. 2 days later, my phone lit up with missed calls, messages, voicemails layered with confusion, then irritation, then anger. "Why won't my key work?" she asked, as if the problem were technical. I didn't respond. Silence was no longer avoidance, it was preparation. I scheduled a meeting with the building manager. I shared footage. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and said, "We'll handle this." For the first time, someone believed me without needing convincing. That feeling alone was worth everything. Meanwhile, my mother escalated. She showed up unannounced and demanded entry. When she couldn't get in, she left voicemails accusing me of cruelty, of abandonment, of betrayal. I saved them all. Each one made my case stronger. That night, I slept better than I had in months, not because the situation was resolved, but because I was no longer powerless. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was directing, and she had no idea how close she was to the truth. The family pressure came next, exactly as I predicted. Calls framed as concern, messages urging reconciliation. No one asked what she'd done, they only asked why I was being so harsh. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I invited them to wait, because the truth doesn't need defense when it's properly presented. I set a date. I invited my mother over to talk. I told her I wanted peace. She arrived confident, carrying the assumption that guilt would soften me like it always had. I let her in. I watched her settle into my space for what she thought was another victory. Then I pressed play, and everything she believed about control collapsed in real time. The footage rolled silently. Her face changed as timestamps appeared. Days, times, actions she couldn't deny. She didn't cry at first. She tried to minimize, then justify, then rewrite. I let her finish. When she finally stopped talking, I told her calmly that copies had already been shared, with a lawyer, with management. I explained the law without emotion. She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I'd become, because she finally understood she wasn't in charge anymore. She left quietly. No shouting, no apology, just fear. The calls stopped, the visits ended, and the narrative she'd built about me collapsed under its own weight. Family members backed off. Some apologized, most stayed silent, and silence, this time, felt like respect. Weeks passed. My apartment felt lighter, safer, mine. I didn't feel victorious, I felt free, and that freedom taught me something important. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection, and the people who fight them the hardest are usually the ones who benefited most from crossing them. This wasn't the end, but it was the turning point. In the days after she walked out, the quiet felt unfamiliar, not empty, intentional. I noticed how my body reacted differently to my own space now. I wasn't bracing when I unlocked the door. I wasn't scanning the room for signs of intrusion. That constant tension I'd carried without realizing it had started to loosen. But peace has a way of revealing things you ignored while surviving. I began to replay moments from my childhood, how often my decisions were corrected, how privacy was treated like secrecy, how independence was always framed as rejection. None of it had felt abusive back then, it felt normal. That's the most dangerous part. Control wrapped in care doesn't announce itself. It teaches you to doubt your instincts. Sitting alone one evening, I realized this wasn't just about my apartment. This was about finally interrupting a pattern that had followed me my entire life. My mother didn't need to shout or threaten. She only needed access. And for years, I'd handed it to her, because I didn't know another way to exist without guilt. That night, I deleted her spare contact entry labeled Mom Emergency, not out of anger, but clarity. Emergencies require trust, and trust requires boundaries. I wasn't cutting her off, I was recalibrating reality. For the first time, I felt something close to ownership, not just of my space, but of my choices. I didn't know then how hard she'd fight to get that control back. The first attempt came quietly, a message that read, "I don't understand what I did wrong." No acknowledgement, no responsibility, just confusion weaponized as innocence. I didn't reply. The second attempt came louder, through family. My aunt called, voice soft, asking if I was okay. That word again, always okay, never wronged. I listened without correcting her assumptions. I let her talk, and when she finished, I simply said, "There's more to the story." Silence followed. I could almost hear the discomfort on the other end of the line. People prefer simple explanations. Villains, victims. The truth makes them work. That's why I stopped explaining myself. Instead, I focused on building a life that didn't require permission. I redecorated, rearranged furniture exactly how I wanted it, changed routines. Each choice felt small, but together they added up to something powerful: autonomy. And then, without warning, my mother showed up at my workplace. That was when I knew she hadn't learned anything at all. She stood in the lobby like she belonged there, smiling at strangers, asking for me by name. The receptionist looked confused when I didn't greet her with warmth. I walked her outside calmly and told her this was inappropriate. Her face hardened. "You're embarrassing me," she said. That sentence told me everything. This was never about fixing things. It was about image, and I was done protecting hers. I documented that visit too. Dates, times, witnesses. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because patterns matter. When behavior repeats, it stops being accidental. I sent a formal notice through my lawyer. Clear, polite, firm. No emotional language. Just facts and boundaries. She didn't respond directly. Instead, she tried something new. She sent gifts. Apologies disguised as generosity. Things she knew would trigger obligation. I donated them all. That was harder than it sounds. Saying no to manipulation feels like cruelty when you're trained to equate sacrifice with love. But every time I resisted, I felt stronger, more rooted, less afraid of being misunderstood. Friends noticed the change in me before I did. They said I sounded lighter, more certain, and certainty is intimidating to people who rely on access. A week later, she left a voicemail crying, real tears, pain I couldn't dismiss. And for a moment, I almost called her back. Almost. But then I asked myself a simple question. What would change if I did? The answer was always the same. Nothing. She wanted relief, not resolution, comfort, not accountability. So I stayed silent. Not to punish her, but to protect myself. And that silence did what years of arguments never could. Something shifted after that. The family pressure faded, not because they suddenly understood, but because resistance requires energy, and I wasn't giving them any. I stopped defending my choices. I stopped explaining my boundaries, and slowly people adjusted, or disappeared. Both outcomes felt acceptable. One evening, while reviewing footage to archive everything properly, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A clip from months earlier, my mother on the phone in my apartment, talking about me. Not kindly, not worried, strategizing. That was the moment grief hit. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy, because it confirmed what I'd suspected but hoped wasn't true. This wasn't misguided love. This was management. I cried that night, not for the relationship we had, but for the one I'd been trying to earn my whole life. Letting go of that hope was painful, but it was also freeing. You can't heal something that refuses to be honest, and once I accepted that, everything became clearer. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't ungrateful. I was done participating in a lie. And that truth changed the way I saw everything, including myself. Months passed, no surprise visits, no messages, just distance. I rebuilt routines without anticipating interruption. Mornings felt calmer, evenings quieter. My nervous system finally had space to reset. I realized how much energy I'd spent managing her emotions, anticipating reactions, choosing words carefully, softening truths. Without that burden, I had room to grow. Professionally, I took risks I'd avoided before. Personally, I trusted my instincts more. I stopped asking, "Is this okay?" and started asking, "Is this right for me?" That shift changed everything. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter, handwritten, from her. No excuses, no justifications, just acknowledgement. Not perfect, not complete, but real. I didn't rush to respond. Growth doesn't require immediacy. I sat with it, and for the first time I felt like I had a choice instead of an obligation. Because power isn't dominance, it's option. I eventually replied, briefly, clearly. I restated my boundaries. I didn't reopen the door. I didn't promise closeness. I offered a path forward, conditional on respect. Whether she'd take it wasn't my responsibility anymore. That realization was the final shift. Responsibility had been the leash she used for years. Cutting it didn't make me heartless. It made me honest. And honesty is something control can't survive. Life didn't become perfect, but it became mine. I slept better, laughed more, trusted myself fully. The fear of being misunderstood faded.
Because I understood myself now, I realized revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's stability, documentation, calm follow-through. It's refusing to participate in chaos, and I had mastered that. My mother never broke into my apartment again, not because she wanted to change, but because she couldn't. Access was gone, and with it, her power. That was the real surprise. I didn't win by humiliating her, I won by protecting myself, and that victory felt permanent. The ending was already written. What surprised me most wasn't the silence, it was how quickly my body adapted to it. I hadn't realized how much tension I'd been carrying until it was gone. I stopped flinching at unexpected noises. I stopped checking my phone out of habit. My apartment felt different now, not because anything physical had changed, but because I trusted it again. Trust is fragile. Once it's broken, rebuilding it requires proof, not promises, and my mother had exhausted her supply of promises long ago. I began to understand that what I'd done wasn't cruel or extreme, it was corrective. I had corrected an imbalance that had existed my entire life. That realization settled deep inside me, steady and grounding. For the first time, I didn't feel like a daughter trying to earn approval. I felt like an adult choosing peace, and that choice came with an unexpected gift: clarity. I could finally see how often I'd minimized my own discomfort to keep others comfortable, how often I'd accepted intrusion as affection. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger needs an audience. I didn't need one. I had something better: certainty. And certainty doesn't ask for permission. Family dynamics shifted quietly after that. Some people pulled away, others adjusted. No dramatic confrontations followed because I didn't invite them. I noticed how often people respect boundaries only after they realize they're non-negotiable. The ones who benefited from my compliance struggled the most, and that told me everything I needed to know. I stopped trying to explain myself. Explanations invite debate. Boundaries don't. I had learned that lesson the hard way. Slowly, my life expanded into the space I'd protected. I traveled, took weekends off without checking in, made decisions without anticipating backlash. Each experience reinforced the same truth. I wasn't selfish, I was free, and freedom felt quiet, ordinary, sustainable. The kind of peace you don't talk about because it speaks for itself. That was the moment I knew this wasn't temporary. One afternoon, months later, I ran into my mother unexpectedly at a public event. The tension I expected never arrived. She looked older somehow, smaller. We exchanged polite greetings, nothing more, and when we walked away from each other, I didn't feel pulled back into the past. I felt detached, not cold, complete. That encounter showed me something powerful. Healing isn't reconciliation. Sometimes it's neutrality. Sometimes it's the absence of reaction. And in that moment, I knew I had healed, because her presence no longer defined my state of mind. Back at home, I reflected on how different everything felt compared to the night I first walked in and found her sitting on my couch. That version of me felt distant now, softer, more unsure. I didn't judge her, I honored her. She did what she had to do to survive. But survival is not the same as living, and now I was living, fully, without apology. That growth couldn't be taken from me. I archived the footage eventually, not out of forgiveness, but because I no longer needed proof. The threat had passed, the lesson remained. Documentation taught me something I'll carry forever. Feelings fade, but facts endure, and facts protect you when emotions are weaponized. That knowledge felt like armor. I no longer feared becoming too distant or too independent. Those words lost their sting once I understood who benefited from me believing them. Independence isn't abandonment, it's adulthood, and I had earned it. People often ask how I handled it so calmly. The truth is, calm comes after clarity. Once I knew what I was dealing with, the fear disappeared, and fear was the only leverage she ever had. I didn't ruin my relationship with my mother, I redefined it, on terms that respected me as a person, not an extension.
That distinction changed everything. Breaking into my apartment was never really about the space, it was about access, and once I took that away, the problem solved itself. Control can't survive without entry.